The black stallion was known as the Beast at every auction. No one had been able to ride him for years. But when an orphan boy approached and caressed his mane, whispering something in his ear, the horse knelt before him, and everyone in the arena was left speechless. The dawn light filtered weakly through the threadbare curtains of the trailer, casting a pale glow across Jamie Walker's face. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking away the remnants of dreams that offered more comfort than his waking reality. The couch beneath him had long ago surrendered its springs, creating a shallow valley where his thin body lay. For a moment he remained still, listening to the sounds of his Aunt Meredith moving around the kitchen, the familiar clatter of a coffee mug against the counter announcing another day he needed to navigate. 14 years old, and Jamie felt ancient. 3 years since the accident on Highway 15 that had taken his parents. 3 years of living with an aunt who made it clear his presence was an unwelcome burden. He sat up quietly, folding the worn blanket with practiced precision. Within minutes, the couch would return to its daytime identity, erasing any evidence that it served as his bed. Jamie reached under the small kitchen table, pulling out a cardboard box that contained everything he owned. 2 extra t-shirts besides the one he wore, a pair of jeans with patches at the knees, some underwear, a dog-eared copy of Call of the Wild, and a cracked frame holding a photo of his parents, smiling, alive, whole. "You're up," Meredith stated flatly, not turning from the counter where she stirred sugar into her coffee. "There's cereal." "Thanks," Jamie replied, his voice still carrying the soft, uncertain quality that made him an easy target at Shelby High. He poured himself a bowl, eating quickly while Meredith smoked her first cigarette of the day, staring out the window at the barren patch of land surrounding their trailer on the outskirts of Shelby, Montana. Her resemblance to Jamie's mother was cruel in its incompleteness. They shared the same chestnut hair and narrow face, but where his mother's eyes had radiated warmth, Meredith's remained distant, as though permanently fixed on disappointments beyond the horizon. "I need $20 for the electric," she said, exhaling a plume of smoke. Jamie nodded, knowing the 20 would come from the $35 he'd earned that week cleaning stalls at the municipal stables. "I'll get it after school. See that you do." Meredith crushed out her cigarette. "I'm working a double shift at the diner. Don't forget to lock up." The walk to Shelby High School took 23 minutes exactly. Jamie knew because he timed it daily, leaving the trailer at precisely the same moment to ensure he'd arrive just as the first bell rang, minimizing the time available for encounters in the hallway or schoolyard. He moved through the crowded hallway like a ghost, eyes down, shoulders hunched, his too small backpack clutched against his chest like armor. The haircut Meredith had given him 2 weeks ago with kitchen scissors left uneven patches that drew snickers from a cluster of boys by the lockers. "Nice haircut, Walker," called one. "Your aunt use a lawnmower this time?" Jamie slipped into his seat at the back of Ms. Calloway's English class just as the bell rang. The desk's hard plastic surface was etched with generations of bored students' graffiti. He traced his finger over one carved phrase, "Escape or die," finding a strange comfort in its dramatic simplicity. The hours passed in a blur of voices that rarely required his participation. Teachers had learned not to call on Jamie Walker unless absolutely necessary. His answers, when they came, were soft-spoken but often surprisingly thoughtful, a quality that might have earned him academic recognition in another life, one where participation wasn't tangled with the threat of increased visibility. When the final bell rang, Jamie felt the first genuine relief of the day. He walked quickly to the municipal stables on the edge of town, the scent of hay and horses reaching him before the buildings came into view. Something inside him shifted as he approached. His breathing deepened, his shoulders lowered a fraction. "Afternoon, Jamie," called Hank, the weathered stable manager whose leathery face had more creases than a wadded dollar bill. "Got the back 4 stalls waiting for you." "Thanks, Hank," Jamie replied, already reaching for the wheelbarrow and pitchfork. The work was hard and unglamorous, mucking stalls, laying fresh bedding, refilling water troughs. But here, among the horses, Jamie felt a sense of purpose that eluded him elsewhere. While other handlers saw the animals as tasks to be managed, Jamie observed their subtle language, the twitch of an ear, the shift of weight, the dilation of nostrils, reading stories written in movements most people overlooked. He paused outside the stall of an elderly bay mare named Penny, noticing her favoring her left front leg slightly. Jamie set down his tools and entered slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Hey, old girl, something bothering you today?" The mare's ears swiveled toward him, acknowledging his presence without alarm. Jamie ran his hands gently down her leg, feeling the slight heat around the fetlock. "Hank," he called quietly. "I think Penny's got some inflammation here." Hank appeared at the stall door, squinting. "Damn, kid. How'd you spot that? She's not even limping proper." Jamie shrugged. "She's standing different. Didn't look right." The stable manager shook his head, impressed despite himself. "I'll call Doc Peterson. Good catch." By 6 o'clock, Jamie had earned his $4.50 for the day. He stopped at the convenience store, buying a loaf of bread and a small jar of peanut butter with his remaining cash after setting aside Meredith's $20. The Shelby Diner was on his way home, its windows glowing warmly against the approaching dusk. Inside, he could see his aunt moving between tables, her face set in the tight smile she reserved for customers. Jamie was about to continue past when a voice from inside the diner caught his attention. Loud, brash, carrying the elongated vowels of Texas. "Finest piece of horseflesh in 3 counties, and the damn animal's determined to kill anyone who comes near him." Curiosity pulled Jamie closer to the window. The voice belonged to a large man in an expensive Western suit, a cream-colored Stetson placed carefully on the table beside him. Richard Hastings, owner of Willowbrook Ranch, the massive property that had sprung up 20 miles outside Shelby 5 years ago, complete with heated stables and a colonial-style mansion that locals viewed with a mixture of awe and resentment. $50,000, Hastings continued, cutting into a thick steak. "That's what I paid for that Andalusian, and what have I got? A 17-hand monster that's put 3 trainers in the hospital." The men at the table with Hastings, business associates from the look of their matching ostrich skin boots, made appropriate noises of sympathy. "What'll you do with him?" asked one. Hastings shrugged, chewing deliberately before answering. "I'm getting rid of that beast at the rodeo auction next month. If nobody's fool enough to buy him, he's going straight to the slaughterhouse in Wyoming." He jabbed his fork toward his companions. "I don't keep failed projects." Jamie felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard whispers about the demon horse at Willowbrook, an imported stallion so vicious it had broken its last handler's ribs. But something in Hastings' dismissive tone struck a chord deep within him, resonating with a familiar pain. That night, Jamie waited until the lights in the trailer had been out for an hour. Meredith's soft snores filtered through the thin wall separating her bedroom from the living area. He slipped outside silently, retrieving the battered bicycle he kept chained beneath the trailer's small porch. The road to Willowbrook Ranch stretched 20 miles of mostly flat terrain, empty and ghost-like under the vast Montana night sky. Jamie pedaled steadily, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air. The physical exertion felt good, purposeful in a way little else did these days. The ranch appeared on the horizon like a small city, security lights illuminating the sprawling main house and the complex of immaculate stables behind it. Jamie abandoned his bike in a grove of trees half a mile from the entrance, approaching on foot through fields still damp with evening dew. He moved with instinctive stealth, staying low, using outbuildings and equipment for cover. Years of trying to be invisible had trained him well. A few ranch hands were still about, but they moved predictably, making them easy to avoid. Jamie had overheard enough at the stables in town to know where they kept the problem horse, isolated in a separate structure away from the valuable show horses and breeding stock. He found it easily enough, a solidly built stable standing alone about 50 yards from the main barn. A prominent sign on the door warned, "Danger, aggressive animal." Through the gaps in the weathered boards, Jamie could make out movement inside, a massive dark shape shifting restlessly in the shadows. He approached cautiously, stopping when he heard the heavy impact of hooves striking the stable wall with deliberate force. For several minutes, Jamie simply stood still, letting his presence be known without making any attempt to get closer. Inside, the movement continued, agitated, defensive. "They've got you all alone out here," Jamie said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess they think you're too dangerous to be around the other horses." The movement inside paused briefly, then resumed with greater intensity, the sound of a large body moving rapidly in the confined space. Jamie didn't retreat. Instead, he lowered himself to the ground, sitting with his back against the stable door. The wood vibrated against his spine as the horse inside kicked again. "My name's Jamie," he continued in the same quiet tone. "I heard what Hastings said about you, that you're going to the auction, or worse." He reached into his pocket, drawing out a small apple he'd saved from lunch. With slow, deliberate movements, he slid it under the gap beneath the door. "I bet nobody just talks to you, do they? They're all trying to make you do things. Put things on you. Ride you." Jamie drew his knees up to his chest. "I get that. People are always trying to make me do things too. Be different. Talk more. Act normal." Inside, the movement had slowed. Jamie could hear the deep, resonant breathing of the stallion, still rapid with adrenaline but no longer accompanied by the thunder of hooves. "I lost my parents 3 years ago," Jamie continued, as though having a conversation with an old friend. "Highway accident. Semi-truck crossed the center line in a snowstorm. I was at school." He paused, swallowing hard. "Sometimes I think it would be easier if I'd been with them." The night air carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Jamie kept talking, his voice a gentle current in the darkness, sharing pieces of himself he'd never voiced aloud. The emptiness of the trailer that wasn't home, the weight of his aunt's resentment, the invisibility that was both shield and prison. He didn't know how much time had passed when he finally fell silent. The night had deepened around him, the temperature dropping enough to make him shiver slightly. Inside the stable, all movement had ceased. Jamie rose stiffly, his muscles protesting after sitting so long on the hard ground. "I should go," he said softly. "Got school tomorrow." He was about to turn away when he noticed something. The apple was gone from where he'd pushed it under the door. He hadn't heard the stallion approach to take it. "I'll come back tomorrow," Jamie promised, not entirely sure why he felt compelled to return, only knowing that something important had happened in the quiet hours of shared solitude. The ride back to Shelby seemed shorter, despite his tired legs. Jamie returned the bike to its hiding place and slipped back into the trailer, just as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first suggestion of dawn. Later that morning at Willowbrook, Chuck Davis, the head trainer with 30 years' experience handling difficult horses, approached the isolated stable with the wariness of a man who expected violence. He'd been kicked by the Andalusian twice already and had no desire to add a third incident to his record. "Easy now," he muttered, opening the door just enough to slide a feed bucket inside. To his astonishment, the massive black stallion didn't charge the door or lash out. Instead, Thunderstorm stood quietly in the center of his stall, watching Chuck with alert but not aggressive attention. "Well, I'll be damned," Chuck said, closing the door again. "Maybe you're finally settling in." What Chuck couldn't see was how the stallion's attention returned immediately to the small gap beneath the door once he'd left, nostrils flaring slightly as though searching for a scent that had briefly offered something new in a world of threat and isolation. From the shadow of a nearby equipment shed, Mary Two Feathers observed the scene with practiced eyes. At 60, the Cherokee veterinarian had spent decades reading the language of equine behavior that most people missed entirely. She had watched the skinny boy's nighttime visit with professional curiosity, noting the stallion's gradual shift from aggressive defensiveness to attentive stillness. As Chuck walked away, Mary approached the stable herself, studying Thunderstorm through a gap in the boards. The stallion remained in the center of the stall, his ears forward, his breathing calm, a dramatic contrast to his usual state of high-alert tension. More tellingly, his gaze remained fixed in the direction the boy had disappeared hours earlier. "Well," she murmured to herself, a small smile lifting the corners of her weathered face. Looks like the beast has found his soulmate. Mary Two Feathers watched the boy disappear into the darkness, her experienced eyes turning back to Thunderstorm. The stallion's posture had changed in subtle ways most would miss. The lowered head, the relaxed nostrils, the ears still oriented toward the direction of Jamie's departure. In her decades working with traumatized horses, she'd rarely witnessed such an immediate response. "I should document this," she murmured to herself, pulling out the small notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. The following evening, Mary positioned herself behind the equipment shed well before sunset. Her Cherokee grandmother had taught her patience was a hunter's greatest virtue, and she'd applied that lesson throughout her veterinary career. Tonight, she was hunting understanding. Jamie arrived just after dusk, the soft crunch of his footsteps barely audible as he approached Thunderstorm's isolated stable. Mary noticed he moved differently than the night before, less hesitant, more purposeful. From her vantage point, she could see he carried a small backpack. "Hey, big guy." Jamie's voice drifted across the still evening air. "I came back like I promised." Inside the stable, Thunderstorm shifted. Mary could hear the distinct sound of hooves moving through straw, but without the aggressive stomping from the previous encounter. The stallion was approaching the door. Jamie settled into what seemed like an established position, his back against the stable door. "Brought you something," he said, reaching into his backpack. "Another apple, and I found some carrots too." Mary watched as he carefully slid the offerings under the door. Unlike yesterday, the stallion's movement was immediate. Thunderstorm approached the door, his massive head lowering to investigate. Jamie remained perfectly still during this inspection, neither retreating nor pushing for more interaction. "I also brought this," the boy continued, pulling out a worn paperback. "It's called The Call of the Wild. It's about a dog named Buck who gets taken from his comfortable home and has to learn to survive in Alaska." The simplicity of the scene before her struck Mary as profound. No ropes, no restraints, no forcing the horse to accept human presence. Just a boy reading aloud in the growing darkness, his voice steady and soothing. Over the next hour, Mary documented subtle changes in the stallion's behavior, how he initially paced behind the door, then gradually stood still, and finally positioned himself directly on the other side of where Jamie sat. The veterinarian made careful notes about ear position, respiratory rate, and the absence of stress behaviors that had characterized Thunderstorm since his arrival at Willowbrook. When Jamie finally closed his book and prepared to leave, Mary heard him say, "I'll come earlier tomorrow, maybe read a bit more." The next day at Shelby High School, Jamie struggled to keep his eyes open during Ms. Calloway's English class. 2 consecutive nights of secret journeys to Willowbrook had left him exhausted. His head nodded forward, jerking back up when his chin touched his chest. "Jamie." He startled at Ms. Calloway's voice, suddenly aware that the classroom had gone silent. All eyes turned toward him, triggering the familiar twist of anxiety in his stomach. "Sorry," he mumbled, straightening in his seat. Ms. Calloway approached his desk, her expression more concerned than angry. "See me after class, please." The remaining 20 minutes felt eternal. When the bell finally rang and the other students filed out, Jamie remained seated, bracing himself for a reprimand. "You fell asleep on your copy of Great Expectations," Ms. Calloway said, pulling a chair beside his desk, rather than towering over him from her usual position at the front of the room. "That's the 3rd time this week." Jamie stared at his desk, tracing a finger over the etched graffiti. "What's going on, Jamie?" she asked, her voice gentler than he expected. "You seem exhausted." Something in her tone, genuine concern rather than accusation, made Jamie hesitate before offering his usual deflection. He glanced up briefly, meeting her eyes. "I haven't been sleeping well," he admitted. "Any particular reason?" Jamie weighed his words carefully. "There's this horse at Willowbrook Ranch. People call him dangerous, but I think he's just misunderstood." Ms. Calloway's expression shifted from concern to interest. "You know about horses?" "It's the only thing I'm good at," Jamie replied, his voice dropping as he added, "It's the only time I don't feel invisible." The admission hung in the air between them. Ms. Calloway studied him thoughtfully, as though seeing him clearly for the first time. "Jamie, what you're describing sounds like a genuine passion. That's valuable." She paused, then added, "But you need to take care of yourself too. Whatever's going on with this horse, it won't be helped if you're too exhausted to function." That evening, Jamie arrived at Thunderstorm's stable earlier than before, the sky still painted with the fading colors of sunset. He'd taken Ms. Calloway's advice, sleeping for 2 hours after school before making the journey to Willowbrook. "Evening, Thunderstorm," he called softly as he approached. The response was immediate, a low, nickering sound from inside the stable. Jamie froze, his heart suddenly racing. It was the first vocalization the stallion had directed toward him. "Did you just say hello?" he whispered, a smile spreading across his face. As Jamie settled against the door with his book, he noticed another difference. Thunderstorm wasn't pacing or shifting restlessly. The stallion had positioned himself directly beside the door, so close that Jamie could hear his steady breathing through the wooden planks. "Let's see where we left off with Buck," Jamie said, opening The Call of the Wild to his bookmark. "I think you'd understand him. He had to learn that the old rules didn't apply anymore, that trust had to be earned." For nearly 2 hours, Jamie read aloud, pausing occasionally to explain a difficult passage or share his thoughts on Buck's transformation. The stallion remained still beside him, occasionally making soft sounds that Jamie interpreted as encouragement to continue. When he finally closed the book, Jamie heard Thunderstorm shift position, then the soft thud as the massive horse lowered himself to the ground on the other side of the door. "Are you lying down?" Jamie asked incredulously, peering through a gap in the boards. In the dim light, he could make out Thunderstorm's dark form, indeed lying in the straw near the door. The stallion's head was turned toward him, ears forward in relaxed attention. That's amazing," Jamie breathed, understanding the significance of what he was witnessing. A horse, especially one with Thunderstorm's history of trauma, would never voluntarily make himself vulnerable by lying down if he felt threatened. From her observation post, Mary Two Feathers documented this breakthrough with special notation. In her decades of experience, she'd rarely seen such rapid progress with a severely traumatized horse. The boy was instinctively doing what many professional trainers failed to grasp, building trust through presence rather than dominance. For the next week, Jamie maintained his new routine, sleeping after school, completing homework while sitting outside Thunderstorm's stable, reading aloud for at least an hour each night. The stallion's behavior continued to evolve, each small change representing a monumental shift in his emotional state. On the 7th consecutive night, something extraordinary happened. As Jamie slid an apple under the door, Thunderstorm's muzzle appeared in the gap, not to take the offering but to touch Jamie's fingers briefly. The boy remained perfectly still, his breath caught in his throat. The warm, velvety muzzle pressed gently against his hand for just a moment before withdrawing. "Thank you," Jamie whispered, understanding the profound trust this small gesture represented. Mary chose this moment to reveal herself. She stepped from the shadows, approaching slowly to avoid startling either Jamie or the stallion. "I know about your nighttime visits, boy," she said without preamble. Jamie jumped to his feet, panic flashing across his face. "I'm not hurting him," he blurted defensively. "I'm just—" "Relax," Mary interrupted, raising a calming hand. "I'm not going to report you. In fact, I want to help." Jamie remained tense, clearly ready to flee. "You're the vet," he said cautiously. "I've seen you around town." Mary nodded. "Mary Two Feathers. I've been watching you with Thunderstorm for the past week." She gestured toward the stable. "What you're doing intuitively is something specialists call systematic desensitization. It's therapy, not training." "Therapy?" Jamie repeated, confusion replacing fear. "This horse has experienced severe trauma," Mary explained, keeping her voice low and even. "What you might call PTSD in a human. His aggressive behavior isn't meanness, it's fear response." Inside the stable, Thunderstorm had risen to his feet but remained near the door, listening to their voices without showing signs of distress. "He doesn't seem afraid of you," Jamie observed. "He recognizes my scent and voice from examinations," Mary replied. "But he doesn't trust me like he's beginning to trust you." She reached into her pocket, withdrawing several folded papers. "I've brought you some reading material about equine behavior and trauma. If you're going to continue these visits, and I think you should, you might as well understand the science behind what you're doing by instinct." Jamie accepted the papers hesitantly. "Why are you helping me?" Mary's weathered face softened. "Because Thunderstorm is showing improvement that I wouldn't have thought possible. Lower blood pressure, fewer stereotypical behaviors, greater acceptance during veterinary exams." She paused, studying the boy thoughtfully. "And because sometimes the best healers are the ones who understand what it feels like to be broken." In the days that followed, Jamie's visits evolved with Mary's guidance. He brought a small battery-powered radio, experimenting with different types of music and observing Thunderstorm's reactions. "He likes this," Jamie said one evening, as the soft acoustic blues of B.B. King filled the stable. The stallion had positioned himself directly beside the door, his large body relaxed, head lowered in contentment. "Blues has a rhythm similar to a heartbeat," Mary explained. "It's naturally soothing to many animals." Jamie began to spend more time simply sitting inside the stable, allowing Thunderstorm to determine the comfortable distance between them. Mary taught him techniques for introducing new objects, presenting something, then backing away to give the horse time to process the new stimulus. "Each positive interaction rewrites his story," she explained. "Horses carry memories in their bodies. You're helping him create new physical memories that aren't associated with pain or fear." One morning at Willowbrook, Richard Hastings conducted one of his periodic inspections of the stables. He paused outside Thunderstorm's enclosure, where Chuck Davis was attempting to halter the stallion. To everyone's surprise, Thunderstorm allowed the halter to be placed without the usual violent resistance. Hastings watched with narrowed eyes, drumming his fingers against the polished wooden fence. "What have you done with him?" he questioned, suspicion evident in his tone. Chuck shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing different, Mr. Hastings. Maybe he's just getting used to the place." Hastings wasn't convinced. "I want real results. The auction is in 6 weeks. If he's not manageable enough for demonstration, no one will pay even half what I invested." That evening, Mary met Jamie at their usual time, her expression grave. "Hastings is getting impatient," she warned. "He's pressuring the staff for faster progress with Thunderstorm." "But trust takes time," Jamie protested. "Yes, but men like Hastings don't understand that." Mary sighed, handing Jamie a small radio. "Horses are herd animals," she explained while he examined it. "And for him, you're becoming herd. Safety, not threat. Now we need to expand his vocabulary of trust, because Hastings is getting impatient, and impatient men make dangerous decisions." With the small radio tucked under his arm, Jamie made his way back to Thunderstorm's stable the following evening, his mind turning over Mary's warning. The sunset painted long shadows across Willowbrook's immaculate grounds as he navigated the now familiar path to the isolated building. "Evening, big guy," Jamie called softly as he approached. The immediate response, a low nickering from inside, sent a wave of warmth through him. That Thunderstorm recognized and welcomed his arrival still felt miraculous. Jamie settled into his usual spot, but tonight he remained outside rather than entering the stable. Carefully, he placed the radio on the ground beside him and turned it on at the lowest volume. B.B. King's mellow guitar filled the evening air. Inside, Thunderstorm's ears pricked forward, his nostrils flaring slightly at the new sound. Jamie observed the stallion's body language with the heightened awareness Mary's guidance had fostered, noting the slight tension across the powerful shoulders, the minuscule shift in weight as Thunderstorm processed this unfamiliar element. "It's just music," Jamie explained calmly. "Nothing to worry about." He deliberately kept his own posture relaxed, breathing slow and even. Mary had explained how horses read human anxiety with extraordinary precision. If Jamie tensed, Thunderstorm would interpret the music as a potential threat. After several minutes, The stallion's muscles visibly loosened. He moved closer to the door, head lowered in curiosity rather than alarm. Jamie smiled, recognizing the behavioral shift that signaled acceptance. "You like blues, huh?" he asked softly. "Mary says it's like a heartbeat." Over the next several nights, Jamie expanded Thunderstorm's sensory experiences following Mary's systematic approach. He brought different textures, a soft brush one night, a smooth leather lead rope another, always allowing the stallion to investigate each item at his own pace. "The key is letting him choose," Mary had explained. "For most of his life, humans have forced their will on him. Every time you give him a choice, you're rewriting that narrative." Jamie understood this principle instinctively. His own life had been defined by the absence of choices, where he lived, how he dressed, whether he belonged. In Thunderstorm's wary eyes, he recognized his own vigilance, the constant assessment of potential threats that became second nature to the habitually wounded. On the 7th consecutive night of the new approach, Jamie arrived to find Chuck Davis exiting Thunderstorm's stable, looking bemused. "Evening," Jamie called, quickly hiding the apple he'd brought behind his back. "You're that kid from town who works at the municipal stables, right?" Chuck asked, studying him curiously. Jamie nodded, heart pounding. Had his secret visits been discovered? "You know about horses?" Chuck continued. "A little," Jamie replied cautiously. Chuck gestured toward Thunderstorm's stable. "That demon in there just let me put a halter on him without trying to kill me. First time since he arrived." He shook his head in bewilderment. "Must be finally settling in. Good timing, too. Boss is getting real impatient." After Chuck departed, Jamie entered the stable, finding Thunderstorm still wearing the halter. The stallion greeted him with a gentle nudge, seemingly unbothered by the equipment that had previously triggered violent resistance. "Look at you," Jamie whispered, carefully stroking the gleaming black neck. "You're learning to adapt." The following morning, Richard Hastings conducted his inspection of the property, his Italian leather boots gleaming despite the dusty surroundings. As he approached Thunderstorm's stable, Chuck demonstrated the stallion's newfound tolerance for handling. "He's actually taking the halter now, Mr. Hastings," Chuck explained, trying to mask his nervousness as his employer's critical gaze swept over the scene. Hastings observed with obvious skepticism, his fingers drumming impatiently against the wooden fence. The rhythmic tapping, reminiscent of hoofbeats, caused Thunderstorm's ears to flick backward. "What have you done with him?" Hastings demanded, his Texas drawl more pronounced in his suspicion. "Nothing different, Mr. Hastings," Chuck answered, shifting uncomfortably. "Maybe he's just getting used to the place." Hastings' eyes narrowed. "I want results, not maybes. The auction is in 6 weeks. If he's not manageable enough for demonstration, no one will pay even half what I invested." The pressure from Hastings rippled through the ranch hierarchy. Chuck relayed the boss's impatience to the other handlers, who increased their efforts with Thunderstorm, entering his space more frequently, pushing for faster progress with the halter and lead rope. Jamie noticed the impact immediately. When he arrived that evening, Thunderstorm was pacing anxiously, his earlier calm replaced by wary vigilance. "What happened today?" Jamie asked softly, maintaining his distance until the stallion recognized him. It took nearly an hour of quiet presence before Thunderstorm settled enough to approach. Jamie sat cross-legged on the stable floor, allowing the horse to circle him at whatever distance felt safe. Eventually, the stallion's curiosity overcame his anxiety, and he stretched his neck to sniff Jamie's hair. "There you are," Jamie whispered, relief washing through him as Thunderstorm's warm breath tickled his scalp. "I was worried about you." The respite proved short-lived. 3 days later, Jamie arrived at Willowbrook to find unfamiliar trucks parked near the main barn. Mary was waiting for him in their usual meeting spot, her expression grim. "Hastings has brought in a specialist," she explained quietly. "Dexter Morgan from Texas. He's known for getting quick results with difficult horses." "What kind of results?" Jamie asked, dread settling in his stomach. "The kind that come from domination, not partnership." Mary's voice carried the weight of having witnessed such methods throughout her career. Morgan believes in breaking a horse's spirit. Jamie's hands curled into helpless fists. But Thunderstorm's making progress. He's learning to trust. Hastings doesn't care about trust. He wants submission, and he wants it before the auction. The following day, Jamie couldn't concentrate at school, his thoughts constantly returning to Thunderstorm. When the final bell rang, he rushed to the municipal stables, completed his work in record time, then pedaled to Willowbrook with a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. He arrived to find Mary waiting outside Thunderstorm's stable, her face drawn with concern. Morgan had his first session with him today. She said without preamble, "It was as bad as I feared." Inside the stable, Jamie found Thunderstorm pressed into the farthest corner, his magnificent body trembling visibly. Fresh marks on his flanks told the story that Mary's words hadn't needed to convey. "He used spurs," Jamie whispered, horror and rage battling within him as he noticed the small, crescent-shaped wounds. Mary nodded grimly. "And a whip. Morgan believes in showing them who's boss right from the start." Thunderstorm flinched when Jamie took a step toward him, eyes rolling to show the whites, a clear sign of terror. The progress of weeks had unraveled in a single violent session. "It's okay," Jamie said softly, sinking to his knees where he stood. "I won't come closer until you're ready." For 3 hours, Jamie simply remained still, speaking occasionally in a low, gentle voice. He read aloud from Call of the Wild, telling Thunderstorm about Buck's resilience in the face of cruelty. The stallion remained in his corner, but his trembling gradually subsided as the familiar rhythm of Jamie's voice provided an anchor in the storm of his renewed trauma. Mary watched from the doorway, her experienced eyes noting the subtle shifts in Thunderstorm's posture. "This is how healing happens," she murmured. "Not through force, but through patience." The situation came to a head the following day. Dexter Morgan, determined to show results quickly, entered Thunderstorm's stable equipped with spurs, whip, and an attitude of absolute dominance. The stallion, already primed by the previous day's violence, reacted with explosive defense when Morgan attempted to corner him. What happened next became instant legend among the Willowbrook staff. Thunderstorm, channeling years of stored fear and pain, struck with the precision of a fighter who had studied his opponent. Morgan was thrown against the stable wall with enough force to break his arm in 2 places, the sound of snapping bone audible even above the commotion. By the time Jamie arrived that evening, the ranch was buzzing with the incident. Mary met him at their usual spot, her expression grave. "Morgan's been taken to the hospital," she explained. "Compound fracture of the right arm. He's already told Hastings he won't be working with that devil horse again." Inside the stable, Thunderstorm was in a state of extreme agitation. His coat gleamed with sweat despite the cool evening, and he moved ceaselessly along the perimeter, muscles bunched with adrenaline. Jamie entered slowly, speaking in the calm, steady voice that had become their ritual of reassurance. Tonight, however, Thunderstorm showed no recognition, no easing of his vigilance. His eyes, usually soft when Jamie appeared, remained hard with fear. "It's me," Jamie said, his voice breaking slightly. "You know me." Thunderstorm continued his anxious pacing, keeping the maximum possible distance between himself and the human visitor. The fragile trust, built over weeks of patient connection, had shattered under Morgan's brutal approach. For the first time since their midnight meetings began, Jamie couldn't reach through Thunderstorm's defenses. The horse remained locked in his trauma response, unable to differentiate between the hands that hurt and the hands that healed. Jamie sat in the center of the stable, watching helplessly as Thunderstorm circulated around him like a dark planet in a distant orbit. Tears of frustration and grief slid silently down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he whispered repeatedly. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." After 3 hours with no breakthrough, Jamie finally stood to leave, his body heavy with defeat. He reached the stable door when a soft sound made him turn. Thunderstorm had stopped pacing. The stallion stood perfectly still, watching Jamie with an intensity that seemed to bridge the physical distance between them. Then, with deliberate slowness, He approached. Jamie remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe as Thunderstorm drew near. The stallion stopped just inches away, his massive body still vibrating with tension. Then, with extraordinary gentleness, he extended his neck and touched his muzzle to Jamie's tear-stained cheek. The gesture lasted only seconds, but its meaning transcended language. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. A recognition that though Jamie hadn't prevented the pain, he hadn't caused it either. They were, in their separate ways, both victims of the same indifference. Mary, witnessing this moment from the doorway, silently raised her Polaroid camera and captured the image. The enormous black stallion with visible scars touching his muzzle to the face of a thin boy in worn clothes, their connection somehow magnifying the vulnerability of both. The next morning broke clear and cool over Willowbrook Ranch. In the main house, Richard Hastings received disturbing news from one of his night security guards. "Sir, I think there's something you should know," the man said nervously. "For the past few weeks, there's been a kid visiting the Black Stallion at night." Hastings' face darkened. "A kid? What kid?" "Skinny teenager, maybe 14 or 15. Comes after dark, spends hours in the stable. I thought he might be one of the staff's children at first, but—" "And you're just telling me this now?" Hastings interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. "Well, sir, the thing is, the horse calms down when he's there, doesn't cause trouble. I figured it wasn't doing any harm." Hastings slammed his coffee cup down, liquid sloshing over the rim. "I don't pay you to make those decisions. I want this trespasser identified and banned from my property immediately. Install additional cameras at that stable. If you see him again, call the police." That evening, Jamie pedaled toward Willowbrook with a small bag of carrots, a gift from Frank Wilson at the feed store, who had mysteriously pressed them into his hands with a knowing nod. As he approached the entrance to the property, his heart sank. A new sign had been erected, featuring a crude but recognizable description of Jamie himself: "Trespasser, entry prohibited." Beyond the sign, a security guard now patrolled the path to Thunderstorm's stable, while in the distance, the stallion's desperate whinnies called out for the one human he had learned to trust. Jamie stared at the sign, his heart sinking as the security guard's flashlight beam swept across the path to Thunderstorm's stable. In the distance, the stallion's desperate whinnies pierced the evening air, each call more frantic than the last. Standing frozen at the property line, Jamie felt a helplessness so profound it made his chest ache. For the first time in weeks, he would not be able to reach Thunderstorm. The ride back to Shelby was a blur of conflicting emotions: anger, worry, and a deep sense of betrayal. Not of his own trust, but of the promise he'd made to the stallion. "I'll be there. I won't let you down." By the time he reached the trailer, his legs burned with exhaustion and his eyes stung with unshed tears. Sleep eluded Jamie that night. He lay on the lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling, imagining Thunderstorm waiting for him. The gradual realization that Jamie wasn't coming, the return of the terrible isolation that had driven the horse to violence in the first place. Morning arrived with unexpected news. As Jamie walked to school, he noticed people at the bus stop huddled around copies of the Shelby Courier. Curious, he paused near enough to glimpse the headlines. There, in the police blotter section, was a brief note: "Adolescent banned from Willowbrook Ranch for unauthorized interactions with animals on the property." The item might have gone unnoticed if not for the additional quote from Richard Hastings: "An orphan without value won't dictate what I do with my $50,000 investment. This boy was interfering with the professional training of a dangerous animal." Jamie felt his face burn with humiliation. He ducked his head and hurried past, certain everyone was staring at him, knowing he was the orphan without value Hastings had dismissed so casually. At school, however, something unexpected happened. In his first period class, Ms. Calloway handed back essays with her usual brisk efficiency. When she reached Jamie's desk, she paused. "Good work, Jamie," she said, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Your analysis shows real insight." He glanced up, startled by the public acknowledgement, and saw something in her eyes. Not pity, but something fiercer. Support. Throughout the day, Jamie noticed subtle shifts in how people interacted with him. The librarian, who usually barely looked up from her desk, asked if he'd enjoyed Call of the Wild and suggested other Jack London titles. In the cafeteria, Frank Wilson's son Tyler, who'd never spoken to him before, made room at his table with a casual, "Seats open if you want it." When Jamie returned to the trailer after school, he found a surprising pile of apples and carrots by the front steps. A simple note was attached. "For the horse. Keep trying." He stood staring at the unexpected offering, a lump forming in his throat. Someone, perhaps several someones, had read Hastings's dismissive words and responded not with mockery but with this quiet act of solidarity. The sound of a truck pulling up broke his reverie. Mary Two Feathers stepped out, her expression grave. "I figured I'd find you here," she said. "Got a minute to talk?" They sat on the trailer's rickety steps, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the patchy yard. Mary pulled a photograph from her pocket, the Polaroid she'd taken of the moment Thunderstorm had touched his muzzle to Jamie's cheek. "Since you've been banned, he won't eat," she said quietly, handing Jamie the photo. "Just stands staring at the door. Hastings is furious. The auction is in 2 weeks, and no one can get near the stallion again." Jamie studied the image, his finger tracing the outline of Thunderstorm's proud head. "What can I do?" he asked, desperation edging his voice. "I can't get past the guards, and even if I could, they'd call the police." "We need help," Mary replied simply. "It's time to show the truth." The next morning, enlarged copies of the Polaroid began appearing around Shelby, pinned to the bulletin board at Wilson's Market, taped to the post office wall, displayed prominently in the window of the Methodist church. Mary had added a simple caption: "The true tamer of Thunderstorm, Jamie Walker, age 14. The image struck a chord in the small community. Here was visual evidence contradicting Hastings' dismissal. A powerful stallion, known for its violence, gently touching the face of the boy who'd been labeled without value. That evening, a small but significant gathering took place at the Calloway home. Ms. Calloway had invited several influential community members: the editor of the Shelby Courier, municipal veterinarian Dr. Peterson, Sheriff Sanderson, and others who had expressed interest in Jamie's story. Mary presented her clinical observations, explaining in scientific terms what Jamie had accomplished. "This isn't mysticism. It's a trust-based approach proven by decades of equine behavioral research." Dr. Peterson, who knew Thunderstorm's history well, confirmed her assessment. That stallion was deemed a lost cause by 3 different specialists. What the boy achieved is, frankly, extraordinary. As the meeting progressed, a consensus began to form. Jamie's connection with Thunderstorm wasn't merely a curiosity, but something worth protecting. Sheriff Sanderson, who had never warmed to Hastings and his arrogant manner, seemed particularly interested in finding a legal avenue to reconnect Jamie with the horse. Meanwhile, at the trailer, Jamie faced an entirely different reception. Aunt Meredith, furious after seeing his name in the newspaper, confronted him the moment he walked through the door. "Breaking into private property," she demanded, waving the Shelby Courier in his face. "Do you want to end up in jail? Isn't it enough I have to feed you? Now I have to worry about you becoming a criminal?" Jamie stood silently, absorbing her anger with the same still patience he'd learned to offer Thunderstorm in moments of fear. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Both his aunt and the stallion lashed out when feeling threatened or cornered. "It wasn't breaking in," he finally said quietly. "The horse needed help." "The horse?" Meredith mimicked bitterly. "A $50,000 animal owned by the richest man in the county. You think he cares what some trailer trash kid wants?" The words stung, echoing Hastings's orphan without value with painful precision. Jamie retreated to the couch, pulling his knees to his chest as Meredith continued her tirade about ungrateful nephews and the burden he represented. That night, unable to sleep and desperate to see Thunderstorm, Jamie made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of attempting to sneak into Willowbrook again, he walked directly to the Shelby Sheriff's office. To his surprise, Sheriff Sanderson was still there despite the late hour. Mary Two Feathers said you might show up, the sheriff said, offering Jamie a steaming mug of hot chocolate. She thinks pretty highly of you, son, and Mary doesn't impress easy. For an hour, Jamie explained everything, from his first encounter with Thunderstorm to the gradual evolution of trust between them. Without realizing it, he articulated sophisticated principles of equine behavior he'd learned intuitively, his voice growing more confident as he described the methods that had worked. I'm not asking to keep him, Jamie concluded, staring into his empty mug. I just want him to have a chance. If he goes to slaughter because nobody can handle him after I messed everything up. You didn't mess anything up, Sheriff Sanderson interrupted firmly. You showed that animal that not all humans are cruel. That's a gift, not a curse. The following morning, Jamie was startled awake by a knock at the trailer door. Meredith had already left for her early shift at the diner, leaving him to answer. Sheriff Sanderson stood on the steps, holding an official-looking document. Get dressed, son, he said without preamble. I talked to the county prosecutor last night. This is a court order for a supervised visit to Thunderstorm on grounds of animal welfare. Hastings can't refuse. The drive to Willowbrook was tense with anticipation. Jamie clutched the Polaroid photo in his pocket like a talisman, both terrified and hopeful about what he might find. As they pulled up to the elaborate entrance, Richard Hastings himself was waiting, his face flushed with anger. This is outrageous, he sputtered as Sheriff Sanderson presented the court order. I'll call the governor. You have no right to interfere with my private property. The sheriff responded calmly. Mr. Hastings, this order allows Mr. Walker a 1-hour visit, under official supervision, to assess the animal's current condition. You can accompany us or wait here, but you can't prevent this visit. Jamie noticed a photographer from the Shelby Courier positioned near the stables, camera ready. Someone had ensured this confrontation would be documented. Hastings evidently noticed too, his eyes narrowing at the prospect of negative publicity. After a moment of visible internal struggle, he grudgingly led them toward Thunderstorm's isolated stable. This is a waste of time, he muttered. The animal is just being stubborn. Thunderstorm's condition shocked Jamie. In just 1 week without their visits, the stallion had visibly lost weight, his once gleaming coat now dull, his eyes listless. When Thunderstorm caught sight of Jamie, however, an immediate transformation occurred. The stallion whinnied loudly and moved toward the stall door. Hey, big guy, Jamie said softly, extending his hand through the bars. Without hesitation, Thunderstorm lowered his head for the touch. It's just coincidence, Hastings insisted. The animal is testing boundaries. Mary, who had joined them as a technical expert, countered, Mr. Hastings, this isn't coincidence. It's recognition. This horse has a deep emotional memory, as all equines do. He recognizes Jamie as safety. For the permitted hour, Jamie simply sat with Thunderstorm, talking quietly, occasionally stroking the stallion's neck. To casual observers, it might have seemed unremarkable, but to the horse experts present, it was extraordinary. A stallion previously classified as dangerously aggressive behaving with the docility of a child's pony. When the time came to leave, Jamie faced the most difficult moment. I have to go now, but I'll try to come back, he whispered, pressing his forehead against Thunderstorm's. The stallion remained absolutely still, as if understanding every word. The photographs from that encounter appeared on the front page of the Shelby Courier the next day, under the headline, The Beast and the Boy, an Inexplicable Connection. The detailed report, written by the editor-in-chief herself, included interviews with equine behavior experts explaining the rarity of what had been witnessed. The story quickly spread beyond Shelby's limits. The Great Falls Tribune republished it, followed by newspapers in Helena and Billings. A week before the auction, a KRTV team from Great Falls arrived for a special report on the Horse Whisperer of Shelby. Hastings, realizing public opinion was turning against him, changed his strategy. In a calculated interview, he declared, I'm impressed with young Walker's talent. In fact, I'm considering offering him a job at Willowbrook after the auction. Thunderstorm, unfortunately, is already scheduled for sale, but perhaps the boy could work with other animals. The offer, clearly designed to improve his public image, was met with skepticism. Mary was the first to point out the hypocrisy. He called Jamie a worthless orphan 2 weeks ago. Now he wants to hire him? This is control, not generosity. Mary's words hung in the air like morning frost, sharp and revealing. He called Jamie a worthless orphan 2 weeks ago. Now he wants to hire him? This is control, not generosity. The small group gathered at the diner booth fell silent, considering the veterinarian's assessment of Hastings's sudden change of heart. Jamie stared into his untouched mug of hot chocolate, uncomfortable being the subject of discussion. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind, from the supervised visit with Thunderstorm to the front-page story to Hastings' unexpected job offer announced on local radio. "Jamie," Sheriff Sanderson asked gently, "what do you think about his offer?" The question startled him. Adults rarely asked for his opinion, especially about decisions concerning his own life. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just want to make sure Thunderstorm is okay." Before anyone could respond, the trailer door banged open. Aunt Meredith stormed in, waving a creased copy of the Shelby Courier. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted Jamie sitting with the sheriff, Mary, and Ms. Calloway at their small kitchen table. "There you are!" Her voice carried the sharp edge that always accompanied talk of money. "Why didn't you tell me about Hastings's offer? Do you realize what this means for us?" Jamie noticed her emphasis on us, despite the fact that Hastings had extended the offer to him alone. "I just found out this morning," he replied quietly. "Well, you're taking it," Meredith declared, setting her purse down with finality. "Hastings pays his ranch hands twice what anyone makes at the diner. You think we can afford to turn that down? You think you have a choice?" Ms. Calloway cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should discuss what's best for Jamie, considering his unique connection with all due respect," Meredith interrupted, her tone suggesting no respect at all. "I'm his legal guardian. I decide what's best." She turned to Jamie, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "We have bills to pay. This isn't about your feelings for some horse." That night, alone on the couch after everyone had left, Jamie stared at the ceiling, torn between conflicting loyalties. The memory of Thunderstorm's condition during their supervised visit haunted him. The dull coat, the weight loss, the desperate whinnying when he'd been forced to leave. Taking Hastings' job might give him daily access to the ranch, but what would happen to Thunderstorm after the auction? Mary's research into Brent Rollins, the rescue buyer from Wyoming, had painted a grim picture of horses purchased cheaply and transported to slaughterhouses across the border. Sleep eluded him as scenarios played through his mind like fever dreams. In one, he accepted Hastings's offer and was forced to watch helplessly as Thunderstorm was loaded onto Rollins's trailer. In another, he refused the job, and Meredith, furious at the lost income, made good on her frequent threat to contact social services about finding somewhere else for him to live. Dawn found Jamie hollow-eyed but resolved. If Thunderstorm's fate would be decided at the auction in less than 2 weeks, he needed to act now, not later. The following afternoon, Ms. Calloway approached him after English class. "Jamie, the Chamber of Commerce is having their weekly meeting tonight at Town Hall. Would you consider speaking to them about Thunderstorm?" His immediate instinct was refusal. Public speaking ranked among his deepest fears, alongside Meredith's occasional drunken rages and the constant threat of being sent somewhere else. "They won't listen to me," he mumbled, staring at his worn sneakers. "I think you might be surprised," Ms. Calloway replied. "Shelby may be small, but people here recognize authenticity. They've read about you and Thunderstorm. Now they need to hear from you directly." Against all his instincts for invisibility, Jamie found himself standing before Shelby's business leaders that evening. His hands trembled as he clutched the Polaroid photo Mary had given him. The faces before him represented the town's economic power: storekeepers, the bank manager, owners of the local motel and restaurants, and, most intimidatingly, 3 weathered ranchers whose families had worked Montana soil for generations. Jamie's voice faltered. He took a deep breath, focusing on the photograph in his hands rather than the expectant faces. Thunderstorm isn't just a problem horse. He was traumatized by people who confused fear with aggression, just like we sometimes confuse vulnerability with weakness. His voice grew steadier as he continued, drawing on his intuitive understanding of the stallion's psychology. When horses are treated violently, they learn that humans are predators. Their fear turns to defense, which looks like aggression to most people, but it's really just survival. Jamie described the slow process of building trust, the nights of simply sitting outside the stall, offering presence without demands, the gradual introduction of voice, then touch, then more complex interactions. Mr. Hastings has the legal right to sell him for slaughter, but that doesn't make it right, he concluded, his voice breaking slightly. This horse learned to trust again. He deserves a chance. The silence that followed felt eternal. Finally, Frank Wilson from the feed store broke it. "What do you suggest we do, son? We can't just take the horse from him." "No," Jamie agreed, "but we could buy him." The idea, seemingly absurd coming from a penniless boy, landed with unexpected weight in the room. Frank Wilson exchanged glances with Pete Blackwater, one of the ranchers who had remained silent throughout the meeting. "That stallion cost $50,000, someone pointed out. But Hastings would take less now," another voice countered. "Everybody knows he just wants to be rid of it." To Jamie's astonishment, Frank Wilson stood up. "I'm putting a collection jar in my store tomorrow. If the boy's right about this horse, we shouldn't let it die just because Hastings is too proud to admit he was wrong." The following day, a large glass jar appeared on the counter at Wilson's Feed and Supply, decorated with a copy of the Polaroid and a hand-lettered sign, "Thunderstorm Fund." By closing time, nearly $200 in bills and change had accumulated, customers adding what they could, from quarters to $20 bills. Word spread through Shelby's unofficial channels, coffee shop conversations, church committees, school pickup lines. The story of the orphaned boy and the traumatized stallion resonated in ways Jamie couldn't have anticipated, touching something fundamental about redemption and second chances in a community where many had faced their own struggles with economic hardship and loss. 3 days after the Chamber of Commerce meeting, Mary sought Jamie out at the municipal stables where he was finishing his afternoon shift. "Hastings is negotiating privately with a buyer from Wyoming," she said without preamble, her normally composed features tight with concern. "A man named Brent Rollins." The name hit Jamie like a physical blow. During their meetings, Mary had explained exactly who Rollins was, a man who bought problem horses cheaply, promising rehabilitation, but whose real business was supplying slaughterhouses across the Canadian border. "He can't do that," Jamie whispered, the pitchfork slipping from his suddenly numb fingers. "Legally, he can," Mary replied grimly. "Thunderstorm is his property." That evening, Jamie found himself unable to focus on homework or anything else. He paced the small confines of the trailer, anger and helplessness battling within him. The collection at Wilson's store had reportedly reached almost $1,000, an extraordinary sum for a town like Shelby during tight economic times, but still far short of anything that might tempt Hastings. A knock at the door interrupted his troubled thoughts. Frank Wilson stood on the step, accompanied by Dr. Peterson and, surprisingly, Pete Blackwater, whose family ran a modest ranch on the eastern edge of the county. "Evening, Jamie," Frank said. "Got a minute to talk?" They gathered around the trailer's small kitchen table, the 3 men seeming too large for the cramped space. Frank reported that the collection had reached $1,500, impressive but insufficient. "We've been thinking," Dr. Peterson added. "The auction is public. If we pooled our resources, we might be able to outbid Rollins, especially if he's expecting no competition." Jamie felt a flicker of hope. "How much would we need?" "That's hard to say," Frank replied. "Rollins typically offers pennies on the dollar for horses bound for slaughter. Maybe 3,000, tops." Pete Blackwater, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His voice carried the measured cadence of his Blackfeet heritage. "I've been watching this situation unfold. My people have a different relationship with horses than most. We see them as teachers, not tools." He studied Jamie with eyes that seemed to look both at and through him. "You understand this instinctively, I think. The horse has chosen you as worthy of trust. That's a sacred responsibility." Jamie nodded, throat tight with emotion at hearing his own unformed feelings given such precise articulation. "The money is important," Pete continued, "but Hastings's pride is what truly stands in our way. He would rather lose money than admit a 14-year-old boy succeeded where he failed." Over the next week, the community's response continued to grow. The Thunderstorm Fund collection jar at Wilson's store was joined by similar containers at the diner, the hardware store, and even the Methodist Church's fellowship hall. The local bank agreed to match donations up to $1,000. The Shelby Courier ran daily updates on the total, turning the fundraising into a community event that transcended simple charity. 5 days before the auction, the group reconvened at Sheriff Sanderson's office. Frank Wilson counted out stacks of bills and checks on the desk. $7,500, he announced, wonder in his voice. "I never would have believed it." "It's still not $50,000, Mary pointed out pragmatically. "Hastings paid $50,000 for that horse." "No," the sheriff agreed, "but it's substantially more than the $3,000 Rollins would offer for slaughter." "It won't be enough," Mary insisted. "Hastings isn't interested in money anymore. This has become a matter of pride for him." The room fell silent as the group confronted the reality of their situation. They had accomplished something remarkable, rallying a small, economically strained community to raise thousands of dollars in days, but still faced likely failure. Pete Blackwater, who had listened silently until now, finally spoke. "Hastings may not care about money, but he cares deeply about his reputation." The rancher's weathered face revealed the ghost of a smile. "There is another way." As the group leaned in to hear his plan, Pete continued in his measured voice. "You've all noticed the television crew from Great Falls that's been following this story. Tomorrow, I believe it's time we ensure they get an exclusive on what a Texas millionaire thinks is the proper fate for a traumatized horse and the orphaned boy who alone can reach him." Pete Blackwater's plan unfolded in the minds of those gathered, his measured voice planting seeds of strategy that would soon blossom into action. Sheriff Sanderson nodded slowly, a hint of admiration crossing his weathered face as he considered the elegant simplicity of the approach. Using Hastings' own vanity against him, the sheriff mused. It just might work. Dawn broke crisp and clear on auction day, the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above the Great Falls Agricultural Pavilion. The October air carried the first real bite of autumn, crystallizing breath into small clouds that dissipated in the strengthening sunlight. Jamie stood at the entrance, his stomach knotted with anxiety, fingers tracing the outline of the Polaroid photo in his pocket, a talisman of what was possible between human and horse. He wore Miss Calloway's son's hand-me-down shirt, blue plaid flannel, pressed carefully the night before, and his least worn pair of jeans. Despite his best efforts, he felt painfully out of place among the arriving buyers in their expensive Western wear, Stetsons tilted at identical angles, leather boots that cost more than 6 months of Meredith's rent. "Name?" asked a bored security guard at the entrance, clipboard in hand. "Jamie Walker," he replied, bracing for rejection. Instead, the guard's eyes flickered with recognition. "Wait here," he instructed, stepping away to speak into a radio. Moments later, he returned with an unexpected directive. "Follow me, please." Rather than turning Jamie away, the guard led him through a side entrance, bypassing the growing line of registered buyers. Inside, the pavilion had been transformed. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every rafter, and an elevated auction platform dominated the center of the arena. Stable hands rushed about, leading gleaming horses to temporary stalls where they would wait their turn to be presented. "Mary said to put you here," the guard explained, gesturing to a seat near the back but with a clear view of the auction floor. "Stay put until called for." Jamie nodded, too nervous to question this unexpected assistance. From his position, he could see Richard Hastings circulating among potential buyers, his cream-colored Stetson visible above the crowd as he moved from group to group, hand extended in practiced bonhomie, teeth flashing in what passed for a smile. Occasionally, Hastings's gaze swept toward Jamie's corner, his expression hardening momentarily before resuming its artificial congeniality. Though no words passed between them, the message was clear. You may be here, but you won't win. At precisely 10 o'clock, a portly auctioneer in a Western suit ascended the platform. With practiced efficiency, he welcomed the crowd, explained the bidding procedures, and launched into the rapid-fire patter that would pace the day's sales. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin with lot number 1, a 4-year-old quarter-horse gelding, excellent bloodlines, started under saddle. One by one, magnificent animals were paraded before the crowd. Arabians with dish-faced profiles and high-stepping gaits, Appaloosas with their distinctive spotted coats, quarter horses bred for cow work with powerful hindquarters and quick reflexes. Bids flew back and forth, the auctioneer's chant rising and falling like a peculiar form of music. Jamie spotted Mary across the pavilion, standing near Sheriff Sanderson. Dr. Peterson had positioned himself near the temporary stalls, ostensibly examining the horses, but clearly part of their coordinated presence. Pete Blackwater stood alone near the main entrance, his stillness remarkable amid the bustling activity. Most surprising was the KRTV news crew from Great Falls, their camera equipment set up with a clear view of both the auction floor and the bidding audience. The young female reporter was consulting her notes, occasionally glancing toward Jamie with undisguised curiosity. As 11:45 approached, Jamie's heart began to race. He knew Thunderstorm was lot number 17. He'd checked the program a dozen times since arriving. His palms grew damp as the auctioneer announced lot 16, a chestnut mare who sold quickly for $8,000. Then, the moment arrived. And now, ladies and gentlemen, lot number 17, Thunderstorm, black Andalusian stallion, 8 years old. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as 2 visibly nervous handlers led the magnificent black stallion into the ring. Despite a week of stress, Thunderstorm's appearance was striking. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian under the pavilion lights, his powerful muscles rippling with each deliberate step. Head held high, the stallion moved with the natural collection that made Andalusians prized as performance horses. Yet Jamie could read the signs others missed. Thunderstorm's nostrils flared rhythmically, scanning for familiar scents in the overwhelming environment. His ears swiveled constantly, processing the barrage of sounds. Most telling were his eyes, dark pools that swept the audience restlessly, searching. As you can see, continued the auctioneer, this extraordinary specimen has impeccable lineage. Pedigree certificates are available for inspection. We'll start the bidding at $20,000. The silence that followed was absolute, not a single hand raised. The auctioneer faltered momentarily, then recovered. Perhaps we'll start lower. 15,000? Again, no response. Visibly disconcerted, the auctioneer glanced toward Hastings, who made a curt gesture to continue lowering the price. 10,000? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a pedigreed animal of exceptional quality. In the rear of the pavilion, a man in a worn cowboy hat and leather jacket slowly raised his hand. Got a question before I bid, said Brent Rollins, his Wyoming accent hanging heavy in the air. That's the stallion that sent 3 trainers to the hospital, correct? The auctioneer hesitated, looking again toward Hastings, who nodded tightly. In that case, continued Rollins, I offer $3,000. For slaughter, naturally. The words sliced through Jamie like a physical blow. In that moment, all careful plans and strategic patience evaporated. Before Mary or the sheriff could intervene, he was on his feet, moving purposefully toward the auction floor. This horse is not dangerous, he called out, his voice initially wavering before finding strength. He was hurt by men who confused fear with rebellion, just like powerful people sometimes confuse vulnerability with weakness. Hastings surged forward, face flushed with anger. Remove this boy immediately. He has no authorization to speak. Sheriff Sanderson intercepted smoothly, positioning himself between Hastings and Jamie. Actually, Mr. Hastings, this is a public event for which tickets were sold. The boy has as much right to be here as anyone. A tense silence descended over the pavilion as Jamie continued, now addressing Thunderstorm directly. The stallion had gone completely still, ears pricked forward, attention wholly fixed on the familiar voice. They say you're a beast, Jamie said softly, approaching slowly. But I know who you really are. The handlers tightened their grip on the lead ropes as Jamie drew nearer, clearly expecting the stallion's typical violent response to proximity. Mr. Walker, the auctioneer interrupted nervously. We appreciate your concern, but this is a formal auction. If you don't have a bid to offer. I do have a bid, Jamie replied, pulling a crumpled envelope from his pocket. $7,500. All the money the Shelby community could raise. Hastings laughed openly. This is ridiculous. The animal is worth 6 times that, even with problems. Actually, interjected Pete Blackwater, rising from his seat with the fluid dignity that commanded immediate attention. Mr. Walker has every right to make his bid, and I believe he should have the opportunity to demonstrate why his bid, though smaller, might offer greater value. Hastings hesitated, clearly confused by the unexpected intervention from one of the region's most respected ranchers. Before he could protest, Mary added loudly, "A demonstration seems appropriate, considering the animal's controversial reputation." Cornered by public pressure and the curious stares of potential buyers, not to mention the KRTV camera now recording every moment, Hastings finally gave a reluctant nod of agreement. Fine. But when that stallion attacks him in front of everyone, I want witnesses that I bear no responsibility. Jamie didn't hesitate. Moving slowly, he began speaking to Thunderstorm exactly as he had during their nighttime visits, in a low, steady voice full of respect. Hey, big guy. It's just you and me now, like it's always been. For distant spectators, the scene might have appeared anticlimactic, just a skinny boy talking to a horse. But for those close enough to observe the details, it was extraordinary. Thunderstorm's ears, previously flicking nervously, fixed completely on Jamie. His nostrils, previously dilated with tension, visibly relaxed. When Jamie extended his hand, the handler instinctively pulled the lead rope tighter, fearing an attack. "Release it," Jamie requested calmly. "He won't hurt anyone." After a moment of hesitation and a nod from the sheriff, the handler loosened his grip on the rope. Thunderstorm remained absolutely still as Jamie approached closer and closer until his hands gently touched the stallion's muzzle. "See?" Jamie said, addressing the silent crowd. "It's not magic. It's trust." What happened next left even Mary Two Feathers, with all her experience, speechless. Thunderstorm, the untamable monster who had resisted every attempt at submission, slowly bent his front knees and lowered himself to the ground, a gesture that equine behavior experts immediately recognized as the rarest demonstration of absolute trust a horse can offer a human. The pavilion erupted in spontaneous applause. Even experienced buyers, who had witnessed countless training demonstrations, had never seen anything like it. Not a horse subdued by force or fear, but one that voluntarily chose to trust. Pete Blackwater rose again. "Mr. Hastings, I believe we have 2 bids on the table. $3,000 from Mr. Rollins for slaughter and $7,500 from the community fund represented by Mr. Walker. As someone who has raised horses for more than 40 years, I suggest you consider not just the monetary value, but the impact on your reputation." At this moment, the reporter from the Great Falls TV station, strategically positioned near the platform, added, "Mr. Hastings, our team is recording this amazing story for tonight's state news. What outcome would you like the Montana public to see?" Hastings' face flushed red, then paled. The trap had been perfectly executed. Any decision beyond accepting Jamie's offer would now appear not just cruel, but publicly embarrassing for a man obsessed with his social image. $7,500, going once, said the auctioneer quickly, recognizing the situation. $7,500 going twice, sold to the Shelby Community Fund. The crowd erupted in applause again, this time even more enthusiastic. Jamie, still kneeling beside Thunderstorm, buried his face in the stallion's mane, tears of relief silently streaming down his face. Mary approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, kid. He's free now." "What happens next?" asked Jamie, practical reality suddenly appearing through the euphoria. I don't have a place to keep him. About that, intervened Pete Blackwater. The Blackfeet Tribal Council and I have been talking. We have an equine therapy program starting on the reservation. We need an assistant instructor and a special horse to work with traumatized children. The pay isn't much, but it includes accommodation for you and Thunderstorm. Jamie's expression was one of pure disbelief. Me? But I don't have formal training or certifications. Mary smiled. Sometimes the best training doesn't come from books, Jamie. It comes from the heart. All eyes in the pavilion fixed on Jamie as he stood in the center of the auction ring, the spotlight illuminating his thin frame and Thunderstorm's powerful silhouette. The applause gradually subsided, replaced by a buzz of murmured conversations as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. The auctioneer, still recovering his professional composure, cleared his throat. Well then, the Andalusian stallion Thunderstorm is sold to the Shelby Community Fund for $7,500. Please see the clerk to arrange payment. He gestured toward his assistant, clearly eager to move past this unprecedented disruption to his orderly auction. Jamie remained motionless, one hand resting on Thunderstorm's gleaming neck. The stallion stood perfectly calm, his previously frantic breathing now slow and measured, dark eyes fixed on Jamie with an unmistakable recognition. For everyone watching, the contrast between the demon horse of reputation and this tranquil animal was striking. "Would you like me to give you a moment, son?" asked the auctioneer, genuine kindness breaking through his professional demeanor. Jamie nodded, grateful for the brief reprieve. The crowd's attention had already shifted as the next lot was announced, though many spectators continued to watch the boy and horse from the corners of their eyes. "What do I do now?" Jamie whispered to Thunderstorm, reality crashing through the momentary triumph. "I promised I'd help you, but I don't even have a stable." Mary approached slowly, respecting the space between them. "The paperwork's being handled," she said quietly. "Pete Blackwater has arranged temporary boarding at his place until we sort out the details." Jamie looked up, meeting Mary's steady gaze. Did he mean it, about the job and place to stay? "Pete Blackwater doesn't say things he doesn't mean," Mary replied. "The tribal council has been planning this therapy program for years. They just needed the right horse and the right person to work with him." A hesitant voice interrupted them. "Excuse me?" Jamie turned to find the KRTV reporter standing nearby, microphone in hand, cameraman positioned discreetly behind her. "I'm Sarah Whitehorse from KRTV Great Falls," she said. "Would you be willing to tell our viewers a little about your connection with Thunderstorm?" Jamie instinctively stepped closer to the stallion, drawing strength from the solid warmth of the animal's presence. "I just listened to him," he said simply. "Most people look at a horse like this and see aggression, but I saw fear. He needed someone to understand that. And how did you learn to communicate with him this way?" Jamie glanced at Mary, who nodded encouragingly. "I don't know if I learned it exactly. When you've been afraid yourself, maybe you recognize it better in others." The reporter seemed momentarily taken aback by the candor of his response. "That's quite insightful for someone your age." "Horses don't care how old you are," Jamie replied. "They just care if you're honest." As the interview continued, Thunderstorm remained remarkably calm despite the camera equipment and growing crowd of onlookers. The stallion's ears occasionally flicked toward unexpected sounds, but his attention always returned to Jamie, as though the boy were a fixed point in a chaotic world. Richard Hastings watched from a distance, his expression unreadable as he observed the media attention now focused on the teenager he had dismissed so easily. Without acknowledging anyone, he turned abruptly and left the pavilion, his expensive boots clicking against the concrete floor. When the reporter finally thanked Jamie and moved away, Pete Blackwater approached, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. "You handled that well," he observed. "The camera makes most people nervous." Jamie shrugged. "After everything else today, a camera doesn't seem so scary." Pete nodded toward Thunderstorm. "We should get him settled at my place. He's had enough excitement for one day." The logistics of transporting Thunderstorm to Pete's ranch occupied the next hour. locating a suitable trailer, carefully loading the stallion with Jamie's reassuring presence, arranging the necessary paperwork. Throughout it all, the horse demonstrated a newfound willingness to cooperate that astounded the experienced handlers. "I've never seen anything like it," Chuck Davis admitted as he helped secure the trailer doors. "That same horse nearly killed Dexter Morgan 2 weeks ago." "It's not the same horse," Mary replied. "Or rather, this is who he always was beneath the fear." As they prepared to depart, Sheriff Sanderson approached Jamie with an unexpected question. "Have you told your aunt about any of this yet?" The blood drained from Jamie's face. In the intensity of the auction, he had completely forgotten about Meredith. "No, sir. She's working a double shift at the diner today." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "I think I should come along when you tell her. This is a big change, and there will be legal considerations since you're a minor." The convoy of vehicles, Pete's truck pulling the horse trailer, Mary's weathered Jeep, and the sheriff's patrol car, made their way through the golden afternoon light toward Pete's modest ranch on the eastern edge of Shelby County. Jamie rode with Pete, occasionally glancing back through the small window to check on Thunderstorm. "He's doing fine," Pete assured him. "Horses can sense when they're heading towards something better." "How do you know it's better?" Jamie asked, the day's emotional roller coaster leaving him suddenly vulnerable to doubt. "What if I can't do this job right? What if he needs more than I can give him?" Pete considered the question with the thoughtful silence that characterized his approach to important matters. "When I was about your age," he finally said, "my grandfather told me something I've never forgotten. He said the Creator doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called." "What does that mean?" "It means that sometimes the very thing that others see as your weakness is actually your greatest strength. Your understanding of this horse didn't come from books or training certificates. It came from your own experiences of being misunderstood and overlooked." Pete glanced at Jamie. That kind of wisdom can't be taught. They arrived at Pete's ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The property was modest by Montana standards. 100 acres of mixed grassland and gentle hills, a weathered but well-maintained barn, and a simple one-story house with a covered porch. 3 older horses grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture, raising their heads curiously as the trailer approached. With careful coordination, they unloaded Thunderstorm into a prepared stall in the barn. The stallion snorted softly as he explored his new surroundings, nostrils flaring to capture the unfamiliar scents. "I'll stay with him for a while," Jamie said, watching Thunderstorm's methodical investigation of the stall. "Help him settle in." Mary nodded approvingly. "Good instinct. This is a lot of change in one day, even with you here as his constant." As the others retreated to the house to discuss logistics, Jamie settled on a bale of hay outside Thunderstorm's stall, talking softly about everything and nothing, the other horses visible through the barn door, the mountains in the distance, the fresh hay in his manger. Gradually, Thunderstorm's investigative circuit of the stall slowed. He approached the half door where Jamie sat, extending his muzzle in greeting. The stallion's eyes, once so wild with fear, now held a different quality: alertness without panic, interest without defensive aggression. "This is just the beginning," Jamie promised, reaching up to stroke the velvet softness of Thunderstorm's nose. "No more people hurting you." The stallion's response was to lower his massive head, pressing his forehead against Jamie's chest in a gesture of such profound trust that the boy's eyes filled with unexpected tears. This wasn't just an animal accepting a human's presence. This was a conscious choice to connect, to extend trust where trust had been previously betrayed. Later, as twilight deepened into evening, Sheriff Sanderson drove Jamie back to the trailer to face Meredith. The conversation went almost exactly as Jamie had feared. Initial disbelief followed by anger, particularly when she realized her nephew would be moving 20 miles away to the edge of the Blackfeet Reservation. "So you're just leaving?" she demanded, cigarette smoke punctuating her words as she paced the small living room. "After everything I've done for you?" Jamie remained silent, recognizing that her anger stemmed partly from genuine concern but mostly from the financial implications of losing his contribution to household expenses, and potentially the state support she received as his guardian. Sheriff Sanderson intervened with diplomatic precision. "Miss Walker, this is a remarkable opportunity for Jamie. The position includes room and board plus a small stipend. He'll continue his education with Ms. Calloway providing supervised homeschooling twice weekly." "And who approved all this?" Meredith asked sharply. "Last I checked, I'm his legal guardian." "The arrangement will need your consent," the sheriff acknowledged. "But the Blackfeet Tribal Council's program has been approved by the state's Child Welfare Department as an appropriate placement for qualifying youth." Pete Blackwater had anticipated this challenge. His solution was both practical and effective. The program would provide Meredith with a monthly stipend equivalent to what she currently received for Jamie's care, acknowledging her continued legal guardianship while allowing him to live at the ranch. By the time they left with a small duffel bag containing Jamie's meager possessions, Meredith had grudgingly signed the temporary placement forms, her resistance worn down by the combined weight of official authority and financial pragmatism. "She'll come around," the sheriff said as they drove away from the trailer park. "Sometimes people need time to adjust to change, especially when it challenges their view of how things should be." Jamie nodded, understanding that the comment applied equally to Thunderstorm's former owner. "Do you think Hastings will cause more trouble?" "Hard to say," the sheriff replied thoughtfully. "Men like that don't like to lose, especially not publicly. But he's also a businessman, and sometimes cutting your losses is the smarter play." When they returned to Pete's ranch, Jamie found Thunderstorm standing alert in his stall, ears pricked forward as if he'd been waiting specifically for Jamie's return. The moment of recognition between them, the softening of the stallion's posture, the low nickering greeting, confirmed what everyone watching already knew. These two broken souls had somehow found healing in each other. Mary approached with a mug of hot chocolate. "Your room's ready whenever you want to see it," she said, nodding toward the small apartment above the barn. "It's nothing fancy, but it's yours." "I think I'll stay here a bit longer," Jamie replied, not yet ready to leave Thunderstorm alone in this new environment. Mary smiled understandingly. "I figured you might say that." She handed him the mug and a folded blanket. "The nights get cold out here." As darkness settled completely over the ranch and the others retreated to the main house, Jamie sat outside Thunderstorm's stall, occasionally speaking softly, but mostly allowing a comfortable silence to envelop them both. The stallion remained near the door, sometimes dozing but always positioning himself close to the boy. In this quiet moment, without the drama of the auction or the stress of confrontation, the true nature of their connection revealed itself most clearly. It wasn't control or dominance. It wasn't even traditional training. It was a language of mutual recognition. Two beings who had experienced profound isolation, finding in each other a reflection of their own wounded hearts, and in that reflection, a path toward healing. 7,500 going once, Jamie whispered, echoing the auctioneer's words from hours earlier. 7,500 going twice. Sold to the Shelby Community Fund. Thunderstorm snorted softly, as if acknowledging the words that had changed both their fates. Jamie reached through the stall door, resting his hand on the stallion's powerful neck. "We're free now," he murmured. "Both of us." Dawn painted the eastern sky in bands of amber and violet as Jamie awoke in his new room above Pete Blackwater's barn. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place the unfamiliar ceiling above him or the sounds of horses moving below. Then reality rushed back. The auction, Thunderstorm, the Blackfeet Tribal Council's offer, and he sat up quickly, eager to check on his four-legged friend. The small apartment was sparse but comfortable, a twin bed with fresh linens, a pine dresser, a desk beneath a window overlooking the pastures, and a compact bathroom with a shower that actually had reliable hot water, a luxury the trailer had lacked. Someone, Mary, he guessed, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill and a hand-knitted blanket at the foot of the bed. Jamie dressed quickly in his limited wardrobe and descended the narrow staircase that led directly into the barn. The sweet scent of hay and the earthy musk of horses enveloped him, more comforting than any human home had ever been. "Morning," he called softly, approaching Thunderstorm's stall. The stallion's head appeared immediately at the half door, ears pricked forward in greeting, His dark eyes, once wild with fear, now held recognition and what Jamie had come to interpret as cautious contentment. "How'd you sleep?" Jamie asked, extending his hand. Thunderstorm snuffled his palm, then pressed his forehead against Jamie's chest, the greeting gesture that had become their ritual. The stallion's coat gleamed in the early light filtering through the barn windows, his recent stress gradually giving way to improved physical condition. "I brought you something," Jamie said, producing an apple from his pocket. He held it in his open palm, remembering Mary's lessons about choice. Thunderstorm delicately took the offering, crunching it with obvious enjoyment. Jamie noticed how the stallion no longer flinched when he raised his hand, a small but significant victory over months of conditioned fear response. Footsteps announced Mary's arrival. "You two are up early," she observed, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "Couldn't sleep much," Jamie admitted. "Keep thinking someone's going to show up and say it was all a mistake." Mary smiled, the morning light accentuating the network of lines that mapped her years of experience. "No mistake, kid, but we do have a lot to figure out." Over breakfast in Pete's kitchen, scrambled eggs and toast that Jamie devoured with the intensity of a teenager whose growth had been stunted by years of irregular meals, they outlined the immediate challenges. Thunderstorm needed a thorough veterinary examination. The therapy program required proper facilities. Most urgently, Jamie's education needed formal structure to satisfy state requirements. "Ms. Calloway is coming this afternoon," Pete explained, refilling Jamie's orange juice. "She'll assess where you stand academically and develop a homeschooling plan." Jamie nodded, trying to mask his anxiety. School had always been a mixed experience. He absorbed information easily when interested but struggled with the social dynamics and rigid expectations. "What about Thunderstorm?" he asked. "What happens to him while I'm studying?" "That's the beauty of this arrangement," Mary replied. "Your education can incorporate your work with him. Ms. Calloway seems quite willing to adapt the curriculum to include equine behavior, anatomy, even business aspects of running a therapy program." After breakfast, Dr. Peterson arrived to examine Thunderstorm. Jamie stayed at the stallion's head, speaking softly throughout the examination, while the veterinarian methodically assessed the horse's condition. "He's underweight, but not severely," Dr. Peterson concluded. "Some old scar tissue on his flanks from spurs and whips, nothing that won't heal with proper care." He paused, studying the stallion's relaxed demeanor around Jamie. "The psychological rehabilitation is what's truly remarkable. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself." By midday, the practical realities of their new situation began taking shape. The paddock adjacent to the barn was designated as Thunderstorm's initial turnout area, small enough to feel secure but allowing freedom of movement. Mary developed a feeding regimen to help the stallion regain weight. Pete showed Jamie the storage room they would convert into a tack and therapy equipment space. When Ms. Calloway arrived, Jamie was surprised to find himself genuinely pleased to see her. She brought not only textbooks but also several volumes on equine behavior and therapy techniques. "I spoke with the district superintendent," she explained, as they settled at the kitchen table. "We've developed an educational plan that satisfies state requirements while acknowledging your special circumstances." Jamie leafed through the materials, relieved to find them less intimidating than expected. "So I can keep working with Thunderstorm while learning?" "Not just while learning, as part of learning," Ms. Calloway corrected. "For instance, calculating feed ratios incorporates practical mathematics. Documenting his rehabilitation develops writing skills. Researching equine psychology and behavior builds research competencies." The afternoon unfolded in a rhythm entirely different from Jamie's previous life. Periods of academic work interspersed with practical horse care, all without the constant tension of Meredith's unpredictable moods or the social navigation of school hallways. As sunset approached, Lisa Running Bear arrived from the tribal council, a compact woman in her 40s with an air of quiet authority. She surveyed the barn with experienced eyes before turning her attention to Thunderstorm. "He's magnificent," she commented, maintaining a respectful distance. "Our elders would say he carries thunder in his spirit." "He was abused," Jamie explained, protective instinct flaring. He's not dangerous, just wounded, Lisa finished for him, like many who come to our program. She explained that the Blackfeet Equine Therapy Initiative had been years in development. Funded by tribal health resources and federal grants, it would serve both reservation youth and children from surrounding communities who had experienced trauma. From domestic violence to loss of parents, from extreme poverty to substance abuse in their homes. We believe horses carry special medicine, Lisa continued. They mirror our emotions honestly, without judgment. For children who've learned not to trust words, this silent language can be healing. Jamie understood this instinctively. His own connection with Thunderstorm had formed in those wordless moments of mutual recognition, broken spirit to broken spirit. As night fell, Pete barbecued steaks on the porch grill while Mary prepared a salad and corn on the cob. The casual domesticity of the scene felt alien to Jamie, who had grown accustomed to microwaved meals eaten alone or tense silences at Meredith's table. Sheriff Sanderson called, Pete mentioned as they ate. Hastings has listed Willowbrook Ranch for sale. Seems he's heading back to Texas. Mary raised an eyebrow. Running away with his tail between his legs, or cutting his losses, Pete countered. Men like Hastings don't waste time on lost causes. He'll find another playground for his money. After dinner, Jamie returned to the barn for a final check on Thunderstorm. The stallion had settled well, showing none of the anxiety behaviors, pacing, weaving, cribbing, that often accompanied horses in new environments. "You're braver than me," Jamie murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "Everything's new, but you're handling it like a pro." The stallion lowered his head to Jamie's level, his breath warm against the boy's face. In those dark eyes, Jamie saw not just animal intelligence but something deeper, a wisdom born of suffering, an appreciation for safety after knowing danger. Jamie's first week at the ranch established a routine that balanced structure with freedom. Mornings began with caring for Thunderstorm and the other horses, followed by academic sessions with Ms. Calloway's materials. Afternoons were dedicated to developing the therapy program, building specialized equipment, adapting the barn for accessibility, gradually introducing Thunderstorm to new experiences. Mary proved an invaluable mentor, translating Jamie's intuitive understanding of Thunderstorm into teachable principles. "What you do naturally needs to become deliberate," she explained. "If others are going to learn from you, you need to understand the why behind the what." By the weekend, news of the Horse Whisperer of Shelby had spread beyond Montana's borders. A reporter from a regional equine magazine arrived to interview Jamie, fascinated by the story of the boy who had reached a supposedly untamable horse. "What's your secret?" the reporter asked, notebook poised. Jamie considered the question seriously. "I don't think it's a secret. I just gave him time to show me who he really was, not who people thought he was." The article, published the following week, captured both the dramatic auction confrontation and the deeper principles behind Jamie's approach. It included Mary's clinical explanations of trauma response in horses and Pete's thoughtful reflections on the parallel between human and equine rehabilitation. The publicity brought unexpected benefits. A tack shop in Great Falls donated specialized equipment. A feed company offered a year's supply of premium grain. Most valuable was the arrival of volunteers, retired teachers offering academic support, ranch hands helping with facility improvements, and even a physical therapist experienced in adaptive riding for disabled children. Yet the most significant development came 10 days after the auction, when Lisa Running Bear arrived with unexpected news. "Our first therapy client is ready to begin," she announced during lunch. Lily Thompson, 8 years old. She hasn't spoken since witnessing extreme domestic violence 6 months ago. Jamie felt a flutter of panic. Reading about therapy techniques was entirely different from actually working with a traumatized child. "Shouldn't we wait for more preparation? Maybe get some professional therapists involved first?" Lisa smiled gently. "We have professionals, child psychologists and social workers who've been working with Lily for months. But sometimes traditional therapy reaches its limits. That's where you and Thunderstorm come in." "Me? But I don't have any training, or..." "You have something more valuable," Lisa interrupted. You understand what it means to be silenced by circumstances beyond your control. So does Thunderstorm. Lily needs to see that recovery is possible. The following morning, Jamie awoke before dawn, anxiety tightening his chest. He spent extra time with Thunderstorm, carefully grooming every inch of the stallion's coal-black coat until it gleamed in the early light. "We need to help someone today," he explained softly as he worked. "Someone who's been hurt like you were. Think you can handle that?" Thunderstorm stood patiently, occasionally turning his head to watch Jamie with those expressive eyes that seemed to understand far more than anyone might expect from an animal. At 9 o'clock, a social services van pulled into the ranch driveway. Jamie watched from the barn door as Lisa greeted a thin woman in professional attire and a tiny figure who remained half-hidden behind her. Even from a distance, the child's body language spoke volumes. Shoulders hunched, head down, physically present but emotionally fortified behind invisible walls. "Remember," Mary murmured beside him, "no pressure, no expectations. Just like with Thunderstorm." Jamie nodded, suddenly grateful for all those nights he'd spent simply sitting outside Thunderstorm's stall, asking nothing, demanding nothing, offering only presence and patience. Without realizing it, he had been practicing precisely the approach this silent child might need. The social worker gently guided Lily toward the barn. As they drew closer, Jamie could see her more clearly. Pale skin, dark hair cut unevenly, eyes that darted constantly, assessing potential threats. Recognition flashed through him. He had seen that same hypervigilance in Thunderstorm, in himself, in anyone who had learned that safety was conditional and temporary. "Hi, Lily," he said softly, kneeling to meet her eye level. "I'm Jamie. This is Thunderstorm. You have something in common. You both know scary things and needed to protect yourselves." The child's eyes widened slightly, gaze shifting to the enormous black stallion visible just inside the barn door. Jamie recognized the moment. Not fear exactly, but the overwhelm that came from encountering something powerful and unknown. It was exactly how he'd felt the first night at Willowbrook, standing outside Thunderstorm's isolated stable. "You can stay right where you are," Jamie continued gently. "We won't come closer until you're ready. Sometimes watching from a distance is the bravest thing you can do." For 3 weeks, Lily remained at the edge of the paddock, watching silently as Jamie worked with Thunderstorm. Each morning, she would arrive with her social worker, take her position on a small wooden bench Pete had built specially for her, and simply observe. She never approached the fence, never responded verbally to Jamie's gentle greetings, never made any move to engage directly. Yet she returned every day, her attendance itself a form of communication. "She's coming back," Mary noted on the 5th day. "That's significant. Children with trauma like hers often refuse to return to places that make them uncomfortable." Jamie understood this principle intimately. His approach with Lily mirrored exactly what had worked with Thunderstorm, creating a space where presence without pressure allowed trust to develop at its own pace. Each day, he would acknowledge her arrival with a simple, "Morning, Lily," then continue his work with Thunderstorm, sometimes narrating his actions, sometimes working in companionable silence. "See how he's holding his ears now?" Jamie would explain, loud enough for Lily to hear without directly addressing her. "That means he's relaxed but paying attention. When they're pinned back, that means he's feeling threatened." On particularly cold mornings, Lisa would bring Lily a thermos of hot chocolate. The girl would wrap her small hands around the cup, her eyes never leaving Thunderstorm. Jamie recognized the intensity of her focus. It wasn't mere curiosity, but something deeper, a recognition perhaps of something familiar in the stallion's cautious movements and watchful eyes. "I think she sees herself in him," Jamie told Mary one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. "The way I did." Mary nodded thoughtfully. "Trauma creates a kind of unspoken brotherhood. You recognize the signs in others because you've lived them yourself." By the 3rd week, Jamie noticed subtle changes in Lily's behavior. She had begun bringing a small sketchbook, filling pages with careful drawings of Thunderstorm. When Jamie approached the fence near her bench to adjust a piece of equipment, she no longer shrank back. Most tellingly, Her gaze had started to include Jamie in its circuit, watching not just the horse, but the interaction between boy and stallion. "We need to be patient," Lisa reminded the therapy team during their weekly meeting. "Lily's silence isn't stubbornness or inability. It's protection. She'll speak when she feels safe enough." The breakthrough came unexpectedly on a crisp autumn morning. Jamie was demonstrating to Lily how Thunderstorm communicated through body language, something he'd been doing regularly as part of their one-sided sessions. "Horses talk with their whole bodies," he explained, standing beside Thunderstorm in the center of the paddock. "See how his nostrils are right now. When they're relaxed like this, he's feeling safe. When they get big and round..." Jamie made a sudden movement that startled the stallion slightly, causing his nostrils to flare momentarily. "That means he's alert or concerned." Jamie continued his gentle explanation, pointing out how Thunderstorm's ears tracked sounds, how his tail position indicated his comfort level, how the tension or relaxation in his powerful neck revealed his emotional state. "The most amazing thing is that horses can't lie about how they feel," Jamie said, stroking Thunderstorm's gleaming neck. "People can pretend they're okay when they're not. We do it all the time. But horses always tell the truth with their bodies. That's why we can trust them." As he spoke, Jamie noticed something extraordinary. Lily had moved from her bench to the fence line, standing with her fingers curled around the wooden rail. It was the closest she had ever come to Thunderstorm. Her face held an expression of intense concentration, as though processing this new information about honesty and bodies and feelings. Jamie continued calmly, though his heart raced at this development. "Would you like to see how he responds to different people?" he asked, directing the question to Lily for the first time. The girl didn't speak, but she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Mary, could you come over here?" Jamie called. Mary approached unhurriedly, stopping several yards from the fence. "What do you notice about Thunderstorm right now, Jamie?" she asked, following his educational approach. "His ears are forward but moving slightly, tracking your approach," Jamie replied. "His stance is relaxed but attentive. He recognizes you as someone familiar who hasn't hurt him." Mary moved closer, and Thunderstorm stretched his neck over the fence to sniff her outstretched hand. "Now he's greeting me," Mary explained. "Horses use scent as identification. He's confirming that I'm still the same person he remembers." Throughout this demonstration, Lily remained at the fence, watching with unwavering attention. Jamie noticed her fingers tightening slightly on the wooden rail when Thunderstorm moved toward Mary. "Would you like to see what happens when he meets someone new?" Jamie asked. Again, that slight nod. Pete Blackwater, who had been working in the barn, approached at Jamie's signal. Unlike Mary, Pete had had minimal interaction with Thunderstorm, creating a perfect demonstration opportunity. As Pete neared the fence, Thunderstorm's body language shifted noticeably. His head raised higher, ears pricked forward with more tension, nostrils flaring as he assessed this less familiar human. "He's not afraid," Jamie explained to Lily, "but he's more cautious. He needs to decide if Pete is safe." Pete stood quietly, making no attempt to touch or approach the stallion. After several moments of assessment, Thunderstorm lowered his head slightly and took a step toward the fence, curiosity gradually replacing vigilance. "He's deciding Pete might be okay," Jamie continued. "But notice he's still keeping some distance. Trust takes time." For nearly 15 minutes, they continued this impromptu lesson in equine body language, with Jamie narrating each subtle shift in Thunderstorm's behavior. Throughout it all, Lily remained fixed at the fence, absorbing every word and movement with extraordinary focus. When the demonstration concluded, Jamie led Thunderstorm back to the center of the paddock, giving him a gentle pat before walking toward Lily. He stopped a respectful distance from the fence. "Horses are really good teachers about feelings," he said quietly. "They show us it's okay to be cautious when we're not sure, and it's okay to trust when it feels right." Lily looked directly at him, then back at Thunderstorm. Her small hand reached out slightly, not toward Jamie, but toward the stallion still standing in the paddock. "Would you like to meet him?" Jamie asked gently. The girl's eyes widened, a flash of both longing and apprehension crossing her face. "Not today," Jamie added quickly. But maybe someday when you're ready. He was scared of people too for a long time. Someone hurt him, and he didn't know who he could trust anymore. Something flickered in Lily's expression, a moment of recognition so profound that Jamie felt it like a physical connection between them. In that instant, he understood what Mary had meant about trauma-creating brotherhood. This small, silent child recognized in Thunderstorm's story elements of her own. "We can go as slow as you need," Jamie assured her. "There's no rush." The next day, Lily arrived with something clutched in her small hand, a bright red apple. She approached the fence with newfound determination, holding the fruit up like an offering. Jamie smiled. "That's really thoughtful. Would you like me to give it to him?" Lily shook her head, her intention clear despite her continued silence. She wanted to offer it herself. "Okay," Jamie said, understanding the significance of this moment. "Let me bring him over, but let's do it safely." He led Thunderstorm to the fence, positioning himself between the stallion and Lily as a precaution. "Hold your hand flat with the apple on your palm," he instructed gently. "That way his lips can take it without accidentally nipping your fingers." With remarkable steadiness for an 8-year-old, Lily extended her arm, the apple balanced perfectly on her small, open palm. Thunderstorm, sensing the importance of the moment, approached with unusual delicacy. His soft muzzle brushed against her hand as he carefully took the offering. The ghost of a smile flickered across Lily's face, her first expression of joy since arriving at the program. Jamie felt his throat tighten with emotion, recognizing this moment as something profound, something healing, something that transcended words. What happened next left even Mary, with all her professional experience, momentarily speechless. As Thunderstorm crunched the apple, Lily's hand slowly rose again, this time reaching toward his forehead. With infinite gentleness, her fingers made contact with the white star marking between his eyes. "That's perfect," Jamie encouraged softly. "He likes that." Indeed, Thunderstorm had lowered his head slightly to accommodate her reach, standing in perfect stillness as those small fingers explored the texture of his coat. The stallion's eyes, once wild with defensive fear, were now half-closed in contentment. For several minutes this tableau held, the massive black horse bending to meet the touch of a tiny, traumatized child, both of them finding in that contact something that had been missing in their wounded worlds. When Lily's social worker finally approached to indicate their session was ending, the girl withdrew her hand reluctantly. As she turned to leave, she paused, looking back at Thunderstorm with an expression of such longing that Jamie felt it like a physical ache in his chest. "He'll be here tomorrow," he promised. "You can come back and see him anytime." That evening, as Jamie completed his daily log documenting Thunderstorm's progress and interactions, he found himself writing about Lily more than the stallion. Something fundamental had shifted today, not just for the child, but for Jamie himself. In facilitating the connection between Lily and Thunderstorm, he had discovered a capacity within himself he hadn't fully recognized before. The ability to translate between wounded souls, to create bridges of understanding where words failed. The next morning, Dr. Peterson arrived for Thunderstorm's scheduled checkup. While examining the stallion's improving physical condition, he observed Lily's arrival at her usual spot by the fence. "Is that one of your therapy clients?" he asked Jamie. "Yes. She hasn't spoken since witnessing domestic violence 6 months ago." Dr. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "When I was in veterinary school, one of my professors said something I've never forgotten. The body keeps the score. Trauma lives in our physiology, not just our memories." He gestured toward Thunderstorm. "That's why his rehabilitation isn't just about changing his mind. It's about retraining his nervous system to feel safe again." Jamie considered this as he watched Lily settling on her bench, sketchbook already open. "Do you think that's happening for her too? Relearning how to feel safe?" "It's how healing happens," Dr. Peterson replied. "Not all at once, but in small moments of trust." Dr. Peterson's words lingered in Jamie's mind as spring transformed the Blackfeet Reservation. 6 months had passed since that fateful auction day, and the transformation was evident everywhere he looked. The harsh Montana winter had finally released its grip, allowing tender green shoots to emerge from soil that had seemed permanently frozen. Similarly, new life was taking root in the equine therapy program that had once been merely a hopeful concept. Jamie stood at the paddock fence watching Thunderstorm graze peacefully in the morning sunlight. The stallion's coat gleamed with health, the dull, matted appearance of his Willowbrook days replaced by a glossy black that almost seemed to capture blue highlights in certain light. More striking was the change in his carriage, head held naturally high rather than defensively, ears mobile and expressive rather than perpetually pinned back in fear. "He looks like a different horse," observed Mary, joining Jamie at the fence. "Not different," Jamie replied. "Just himself, who he was always meant to be." The therapy program had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. Word had spread through both reservation and surrounding communities about the remarkable results being achieved. What had begun with a single horse and one traumatized 8-year-old girl now included 6 rescued horses and a waiting list of children seeking to participate. "The tribal council meeting went well," Mary said, passing Jamie a steaming mug of coffee. "The additional funding was approved unanimously." Jamie nodded, sipping gratefully at the hot liquid. The surprising donation from Richard Hastings, $100,000 with the specific stipulation it be used to expand the work of Jamie Walker with traumatized horses, had initially been met with suspicion. Pete Blackwater had argued for accepting it, however, viewing it as a form of restitution rather than charity. "Guilt or genuine change of heart doesn't matter," Pete had said. "What matters is what we do with it." The money had transformed their modest program. The original barn had been renovated with proper heating for winter work. A covered arena allowed sessions during Montana's unpredictable weather. Most importantly, they'd been able to rescue more horses from situations similar to thunderstorms, animals deemed dangerous or unmanageable, whose behavior stemmed from trauma rather than temperament. "We've got visitors coming today," Mary reminded Jamie. "That research team from Montana State University wants to document your methods." Jamie felt the familiar flutter of discomfort at being the center of attention. Despite months of growing recognition, he still struggled with being viewed as special or extraordinary. "Our methods," he corrected gently. "I wouldn't know half of what I'm doing without you." Mary smiled, the morning light accentuating the deep creases around her eyes. Marks of a lifetime spent outdoors, working with animals and the elements. "You had the gift already," she said. "I just helped you name what you were doing instinctively." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Lisa Running Bear, leading a small group toward the paddock. "Jamie," she called, "Lily's here for her session. She's been waiting all weekend to show you something." Lily Thompson walked beside her social worker, but the resemblance to the silent, withdrawn child who had first arrived at the ranch was minimal. Though still quiet by nature, she now moved with confidence, her small shoulders no longer perpetually hunched in defensive posture. Most remarkably, she had begun speaking again, first in whispers to Thunderstorm, then gradually to Jamie, and eventually to the other adults in the program. "Morning, Lily," Jamie greeted her, kneeling to meet her eye level, a habit he'd maintained despite her progress. "I hear you have something to show me." Lily nodded, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. She carefully unfolded it, revealing a colorful drawing of Thunderstorm with a smaller figure beside him, herself. "It's for the new barn," she said, her voice soft but clear. "For Thunderstorm's stall." "He'll love it," Jamie assured her. "Want to give it to him yourself?" Together they entered the paddock, approaching Thunderstorm with the easy familiarity that months of interaction had developed. The stallion raised his head from grazing, recognizing them immediately. His ears pricked forward in greeting, and he moved toward them with the fluid grace that had made Andalusians prized for centuries. "He remembers me," Lily said, a note of wonder still present in her voice despite the regularity of their sessions. "He always will," Jamie replied. "Horses never forget the people who treat them with kindness." As Lily showed her drawing to Thunderstorm, who examined it with comical attention, Jamie reflected on the parallel journeys they had traveled. When Lily had first begun speaking again during a session 3 months ago, it hadn't been some dramatic breakthrough. Just a simple whispered thank you after Thunderstorm had gently taken an apple from her hand. The therapist's observing had been moved to tears, recognizing what Jamie already understood. Healing didn't arrive in thunderclap moments of revelation, but in quiet instances of trust, repeatedly honored. Later that morning, the research team from Montana State arrived, a psychology professor specializing in trauma recovery, and 2 graduate students equipped with cameras and monitoring equipment. They had been referred by Dr. Peterson, who had become an enthusiastic advocate for the program after witnessing its effects. "We're particularly interested in measuring physiological responses," explained Dr. Saunders, the lead researcher. "Heart rate variability, cortisol levels, respiratory patterns. These biological markers tell us more about stress reduction than self-reporting ever could." Jamie led them through the day's sessions, explaining the philosophy that had evolved over months of work. "We don't focus on fixing either the horses or the kids," he told them. "We create spaces where they can discover their own capacity to connect and heal." The researchers observed as Jamie worked with a recently rescued Appaloosa, a former rodeo horse whose spirit had been broken through harsh training methods. The horse, named Ghost for his spotted coat, had arrived 3 weeks earlier, exhibiting many of the same defensive behaviors Thunderstorm once had. "Notice how I never approached directly from the front," Jamie demonstrated, moving in a curved path toward Ghost. "Predators attack head-on. By approaching from an angle, I'm speaking his language, telling him I'm not a threat." Dr. Saunders took notes rapidly. "This contradicts several standard approaches in equine therapy," she observed. "Most protocols emphasize establishing dominance early." "Dominance isn't the same as leadership," Jamie replied, articulating a distinction that had become central to their philosophy. "These horses don't need another human trying to control them through fear. They need to relearn that humans can be trusted." Throughout the demonstration, Thunderstorm remained nearby, occasionally approaching to observe. Jamie had discovered that the stallion's presence had a calming effect on newer rescues, as though Thunderstorm somehow communicated that healing was possible, that this place was different from what they had known before. "It's like he's become a mentor," Mary commented to the researchers. "The progress with new horses is nearly twice as fast when Thunderstorm is present during initial sessions." That evening, after the researchers had departed with promises to return for more extensive documentation, the staff gathered in Pete's living room to review the day. The atmosphere was casual but purposeful. These evening meetings had become an essential part of their process, a time to share observations and refine approaches. "I've been thinking about expanding the youth program," Lisa said, warming her hands around a mug of tea. "We have more referrals coming in from the county social services, children from foster care mostly, with backgrounds similar to Lily's." Jamie nodded, his mind already calculating space requirements and horse-to-child ratios. 6 months of hands-on management had developed administrative skills he never knew he possessed. Ms. Calloway's adapted curriculum had included practical math and business fundamentals that suddenly had real-world application. "We could convert the north pasture," he suggested. "It's sheltered enough for a second paddock, and Ghost and the paint mare are gentle enough for beginners." The discussion continued as the sun set beyond the mountains, painting the sky in spectacular bands of orange and purple. Through the window, Jamie could see Thunderstorm in the nearest paddock, his black silhouette stark against the colorful horizon. The stallion stood alert, head high, seemingly absorbing the beauty around him, no longer constantly scanning for threats, but simply present in the moment. The following morning brought unexpected visitors. A black SUV with National Geographic logos on the doors pulled into the ranch driveway just as Jamie was finishing Thunderstorm's morning grooming. "We received a tip about an extraordinary horse rehabilitation program," explained the producer, a woman named Sarah with a Boston accent and quick, decisive movements. "Our Healing America series features innovative approaches to trauma recovery. Your program sounds perfect." Jamie's instinctive discomfort with publicity surfaced immediately. "I'm not sure we're ready for that kind of attention," he began. Sarah smiled, recognizing his hesitation. "We're not looking for a horse whisperer narrative. Those have been done to death. We're interested in the community aspect of what you've built here. How a small, underfunded reservation program is achieving results that expensive clinical settings can't match." Her words gave Jamie pause. From the beginning, he had resisted portrayals that centered him as some kind of prodigy or miracle worker. The truth was far more complex and more powerful. What had saved Thunderstorm wasn't Jamie alone, but an entire community that recognized value where others saw only damage. "The real story isn't about me," Jamie told the production team as he showed them around the facility. "It's about what happens when people choose to see potential instead of problems." Over the next 2 days, the National Geographic crew documented the program in action. They filmed therapy sessions, interviewed staff and participants, and captured the daily rhythms of care that form the backbone of their approach. Most movingly, they recorded Lily explaining to another child how to interpret Thunderstorm's ear positions, the once silent girl now confidently sharing knowledge that had helped her find her own voice again. On their final afternoon, the crew requested a demonstration of the bond between Jamie and Thunderstorm. "Something that shows how far you've both come," the director suggested. Jamie considered for a moment, then nodded. He led Thunderstorm to the largest paddock, removed all equipment, no halter, no lead rope, nothing that suggested control, and simply began to move. The stallion followed, matching Jamie's pace perfectly. When Jamie stopped, Thunderstorm stopped. When Jamie turned, the horse mirrored his movement with balletic precision. To observers, it appeared magical, boy and horse moving as a single entity across the spring grass, their communication invisible yet undeniable. The cameras captured what words could never fully express, a connection forged through patience, built on respect, and sustained by mutual trust. As the golden afternoon light bathed the paddock, a group of children from the program gathered along the fence, watching in wonder. Among them were faces that told stories of foster care, poverty, abuse, abandonment. Children whose experiences had taught them to expect pain rather than kindness. "That's what I want them to remember," Jamie told Mary as they watched the National Geographic van depart down the dusty road. "Not that I'm special, but that connection is possible even after the worst betrayals." Mary smiled, her gaze drifting to where Thunderstorm now grazed peacefully among the other rescue horses. "I think they're learning exactly that lesson," she said. "Those children watch how Thunderstorm has transformed from a creature of fear to one of dignity. It gives them permission to believe their own transformation is possible." While observing Jamie and Thunderstorm moving as a single entity under the vast Montana sky, Mary Two Feathers smiled at the National Geographic reporter and shared the ancient wisdom of her people. "We Blackfeet always knew that horses aren't just animals. They're teachers sent to remind us who we really are when all the layers of pain and fear are removed." And when the journalist asked what the future holds for Jamie Walker, she answered simply, "He has already found his path, helping broken souls remember their strength. And in this wounded world, is there more important work than that?"